A Christmas Carol, written by Charles Dickens, is one of the best Christmas stories ever written. It was published in 1843, in which Dickens portrayed the difficulties and social issues that he himself experienced as a child. It is the story of one old miser who had been blinded by money. His avarice for money takes away everything from his life, and he ends up being alone. His loneliness and solitudeness made him cold, bitter, and rude. He cares only for himself and lives only for himself. But at the end he became a changed man due to some supernatural intervention in his life. The main aim of the thesis is to study the divine intervention in the novel and the change that I brought in the novel. The thesis will mainly focus on the three spirits of Christmas: past, present, and future. He was first visited by Marley's ghost and foretold him that he would be visited by the three spirits of Christmas. The first spirit is the ghost of Christmas past. The second spirit is the ghost of Christmas present. The third spirit is the ghost of Christmas yet to come. These spirits are the representation of time. The intervention of these spirits led to the transformation of Scrooge overnight from a greedy, selfish man into an old, loving, generous man. This thesis will focus and study the value of money and time portrayed in the novel. The aim of the thesis is to depict how time and money can be of waste and meaningless if not utilized is the right way. It will mainly focus on one character, Ebenezer Scrooge, the protagonist of the novel. Ebenezer's particular idol happened to be money. He worked for it, spent all his time making it, hoarded it, and measured everything and everyone by it. The thesis will also through greed, present in the novel. Is greed that exists deep down in the human heart the reason why people like Scrooge exist? Or is it the money alone or greed the culprit? The proposition will likewise pay consideration on the characters. Every character has its particular components and a settled place inside the story, and every one of them speaks to certain human qualities. The character of Ebenezer Scrooge will be contrasted in relation to the other of Tiny Tim on the premise of their shouts "Bah!" and "God bless us, everyone." Special attention will be devoted to Scrooge's transformation as it's the main theme of the novella. His journey, which takes just one night, takes him to various places, and each of them has its own symbol and meaning. It presents a variety of people, and with their contribution, Scrooge realizes what is important in one's life. This thesis is very relevant to this present society, where one only works for fulfilling the desire of his stomach, thinks of himself only trying to consume everything, while there are people out in the streets hungry and crawling for one loaf of bread to fight for their life. In this present business world, one had forgotten how to spend time and value time. One had missed the whole conception of life. Time were spent for making money. They thought money is life. But when their time is over, when death calls, their money will be of no value. So one should cherish the time he has and should utilize his money in a useful way, like charity, helping others, uplifting the poor, and etc. Charles Dickens was born in 1812 at the beginning of the second decade of the 19th century, and he grew up during the reign of three kings of the House of Hanover until Queen Victoria took the reign in 1937. He lived through the years after the Industrial Revolution and before formation of modern Britain. Although Britain became the most powerful country in the 19th century, with the industrialization growing rapidly and middle classes rising. After Napoleonic Wars, the situation was not so bright. Many people lost their jobs as factories didn't have to produce as much as before, and at the same time, the prices increased too. In this sense, the migration from country fields to city factories and the end of war caused huge unemployment and misery. At that time, the welfare system wasn't developed much. Although there were efforts to help people in need through the operation of workhouses, the reality was harsh and the help was not organized and so not much effective. And the union workhouses demanded Scrooge. Are they still in operation? When two portly gentlemen visit Scrooge to gain some money for the charity, he is inquiring whether prisons and workhouses still exist, as he considers them the right place for the unlucky ones. He is convinced that the taxes he has to pay is enough, and doesn't want to spend any more money on the idle people. The idle people were in fact children without parents, homeless people, or those who couldn't work. Child labor was not unusual, and it influenced Dickens directly. When he was 12 years old, his father's debts became no longer bearable, and he was sent to debtor's prison with his family. To pay his lodgings, Dickens started working in a blacking warehouse, and it was this sad experience that made him so interested in problems of society years later. The character of Scrooge may seem a bit exaggerated at times, but it is the opposite to Dickens' own views of society and charity. As a productive 19th century writer of short stories, plays, novellas, books, fiction, and non, amid his lifetime, Dickens got to be known the world over for his surprising characters, his dominance of exposition in the recounting their lives, and his delineations of the social classes, mores and estimations of his times. Some thought of him as a representative for poor people, for he certainly conveyed much attention to their predicament, the oppressed and those who lack wealth. Dickens' first book, a collection of stories titled Sketches by Boz, was published in 1836, a fruitful year for him. Most of his novels were first serialized in monthly magazines, as was a common practice of the time. Oliver Twist between 1837 and 1839 was followed by Nicholas Nickleby, The Old Curiosity Shop, and Barnaby Rudge. Dickens' series of 5 Christmas books were soon to follow. A Christmas Carol, written in 1843, The Chimes, 1844, The Cricket on the Hearth, 1845, The Battle of Life, 1846, and The Haunted Man, 1848. Dickens had found readership who eagerly anticipated his next installments. Dombey and Son, written in 1846, was his next publication, followed by David Copperfield. In 1850, he started his own weekly journal, Household Words, which would be in circulation for the next 9 years. On June 9, 1870, Charles Dickens died. He was covered in Poets' Corner of Westminster Abbey. Despite the fact that he cleared out the mystery of Edwin Drood unfinished, he had effectively composed 15 significant books and innumerable short pieces. His legacy is clear. In an unusual and exceptional form, Dickens brought up society's defects as far as its blinding revenues for cash and its disregard of the lower cases of society. Through his books, we come to comprehend the ideals of enduring heart and the joys of home in an imperfect, pitilessly aloof world. Among English essayists, As far as his popularity and of the general population's acknowledgement of his characters and stories, numerous think of him as second just to William Shakespeare. The novella revolves around the protagonist Ebenezer Scrooge, who is visited by Marley's ghost and the three spirits of Christmas. The central focus on the thesis is the story of Ebenezer Scrooge, his spiritual experience and his transformation from an old miserable miser to a loving old man. Here we will analyze his character, who is he, why he needs such transformation. To begin with, Ebenezer Scrooge is a money-minded man who owns the London counting house. Money is not only his job, it is his life. He is a miserable, cold, old geezer. The first description of him in the novella says, "Hard and sharp as flint, from which no steel had ever struck out generous fire, secret and self-contained and solitary as an oyster. The cold within him froze his old features, nipped his pointed nose, shriveled his cheek, stiffened his gait, made his eyes red, his thin lips blue, and spoke out shrewdly in his grunting voice. A frosty rime was on his hat and on his eyebrows, and his wiry chin he carried his own low temperature always about with him." From this description we could get the picture of him. He rates irrational things like happiness, generosity, and Christmas, and he is certain that people who collect money such as charity are lazy bums who are too lazy to work for their living. For him life is money, his entire life is his business. He shuts himself every day at his work, and he doesn't have any relatives or anyone except his nephew whom he shuts out. No one ever bothered to stop and say hi to him. No beggars implored him to bestow a trifle. No children asked him what it was o'clock. No man or woman ever once in all his life inquired the way to such and such a place of Scrooge. One day at a Christmas Eve some gentleman came to his place and asked him if he may give some of his contribution for helping the poor and destitute. As expected, the old miser turned them down on such an insulting manner and told them that it's none of his business and not to interfere with his business. He doesn't care about anyone else but him. For him the poor and destitute are the idle people. The idle people were in fact children without parents, homeless people, or those who couldn't find work. He has one accountant named Cratchit. He is a kind and loving family man. Scrooge generally mistreats Cratchit, but the accountant bears him employer no ill will because he believes that Scrooge's life is lonely. The greatest sorrow in Cratchit's life is that his young son Tiny Tim is very ill, which Scrooge knows nothing about as he only cares for himself. Bob's salary is so meagre. The family cannot afford treatment for Tim. If only Scrooge was a good man, he would have known better about Cratchit and his family. He would have treated him more kindly and would have increased his salary for helping his son. But Scrooge is Scrooge, who is only concerned about his business and money. Scrooge is such a miserable man who doesn't use money in the rightful way. He only lives for himself. Dickens portrays this man as an image of the corrupt bureaucrats of the society during his time. He portrays Scrooge as one who misused power and money, but at the same time he gave Scrooge a chance to right his wrongs. Dickens wants the audience to know what is right and that it's never too late to change for the good and become a better man. Scrooge is an ideal example for a man who doesn't spend his time well in a rightful manner. He spent his whole life counting and earning money, ignoring and leaving all the good things around him. The most beautiful and cherished moment Christmas means nothing to him. For his greediness blinded him, he missed all the beautiful moments of his life, leaving all the other things, even the people who are dear to him. As a result of that, he was left alone, having no one beside him, which made colder and bitter. But as the spirits of time, past, present, and future, visited him, he became a changed man. The spirits showed him how to utilize the time of his life in a right way and how to cherish the beautiful moments of life. It all began when his dead friend Jacob Marley's spirit paid a visit to his old pal in his house at the middle of the night. Jacob Marley used to be business partner of Scrooge, but Marley died 7 years ago. Surprisingly, Marley returns as a ghost. Scrooge first saw him when his locket changed into Marley's face. It was not angry or ferocious, but he looked at Scrooge as Marley used to look, with ghostly spectacles turned up on its ghostly forehead. But later the face faded away and became lurker again. Scrooge just ignored it, but the latter visit was way too much to oversee. Marley's ghost came back to warn Scrooge of the horrors that await him unless he changed his ways. Marley was wound around with chain like a tail, and the chain was made of cash boxes, keys, padlocks, ledgers, deeds, and heavy purses wrought in steel. He told Scrooge that all the chains and locks that he wore now were made by him. It was forged when he was alive for not doing good things. Marley appears to Scrooge on Christmas Eve to tell him of the cumbersome burden that he bears in death because he neglected his duty toward others in life. Marley must walk around and watch people and regret that he didn't help anyone or touch anyone during his lifetime. His burden is incessant remorse for his own greed during life. He warns Scrooge that unless he becomes a better man, a charitable person, he will also bear that weight. Marley tells Scrooge of the three ghosts who will visit him. They are Scrooge's only chance for salvation. After the warning, Marley flies out the window and joins the other ghosts who drag their chains of duty. Dickens used Marley so as to showcase the judgment of what the corrupted people get at the end. The idea here is that they will be judged and punished for the deeds that they have done when they were alive. Marley is one example of a man who has been corrupted by money. The opening stave of A Christmas Carol sets the inclination, depicts the setting, and presents huge numbers of the primary characters. It additionally builds out the novel's symbolic structure. The opening aria additionally highlights the novel's story style, and impossible to miss the exceedingly Dickensian mix of wild comic drama and environmental headlines. The metaphorical way of A Christmas Carol prompts generally short-sighted imagery and a straight plot. The last is partitioned into 5 staves, each containing an unmistakable scene in Scrooge's profound instruction. The primary stave focuses on the appearance from Marley's phantom, the Santa 3 presents the stories of the 3 Christmas spirits, and the last closes the story, demonstrating how Scrooge has transferred from a firm curmudgeon to a warm and happy promoter. Hidden the story and paralleling the more apparent topic of good recovery lies a sharp political castigation. Dickens trains in on the poor laws, then representing the underclass of Victorian England. He uncovered the blemishes of the unjustifiable arrangement of government that basically limits the underclass to life in jail or in a workhouse. Dickens' thoughtful depiction of Bob Crackhill and his family puts a human face on the lower cases. Through Scrooge's implicit regard of the poor laws, his contention that detainment facilities are the main philanthropy he wants to bolster, Dickens rejects the reason of the detached high society as an unreliable, childish, and pitiless safeguard. Marley's apparition, similar to the phantom of Hamlet's death, is obviously a spirit in limbo and not one of the accursed. This is clear from its penitential and avowedly Christian soul and its yearning to spare Scrooge from following in its indiscretion-loaded strides. At the point when Scrooge looked to support him with the update that he had dependently been a great man of business, Marley's phantom wrings its hands in heart-driven disturbance. "Business!" he cries. "Humanity was my business. The normal welfare was my business. Philanthropy, leniency, patience, and kind-heartedness were all my business. The dealings of my exchange were yet a drop of water in the complete sea of my business." On the off chance that Marley's apparition in the soul of a mortal man, languishing, penitential, and purgatorial over its wrongdoings, the hosts of Christmas past, present, but then to come are best depicted as blessed messengers, their divine emissaries. Or more particularly, they may be viewed as Scrooge's own particular gatekeeper, holy messengers, as can be seen from the primary ghost portrayal of himself as not being the ghost of long past, but rather of Scrooge's own past. As Scrooge was warned, a spirit-like figure appeared. It has a strange figure, it has a childlike appearance, more of like an old man with a child's body. It is untransparent and has a cap of its hat. It is the ghost of Christmas past. The spirit touched Scrooge and he was able to fly. The spirit took Scrooge to a countryside where he was raised. He saw his old school, his childhood mates, and familiar landmark of his youth. The ghost took him into the school where he saw himself as a lonely boy who doesn't have anyone and who stays at Christmas all alone without having anyone to celebrate with. Scrooge felt very sad and pitied himself on seeing the situation he was once on. And then the boy started to grow older and suddenly they were in another year of Christmas. Scrooge saw a young little girl, her sister Fan, running towards him and telling him that he could come home, saying with his father became kinder. He has given his consent to Ebenezer's return. The young Scrooge, delighted to see his sister, embraces her joyfully. The aged Scrooge regretfully tells the ghost that Fan died many years ago and is the mother of his nephew, Fred. The ghost transports Scrooge into another Christmas of the past. He sees himself in Fezziwig Place, where he was apprenticed as a young man. Mr. Fezziwig was a good man, a generous man who always treated his employees with warm-hearted and kindly. It was only a small matter that made Scrooge and his friends so happy with Mr. Fezziwig that they gave him so much honor and praised him endlessly. After seeing this, Scrooge wished he could have treated his clerk kindlier. Scrooge sees his younger version of himself in his prime of his life in conversation with a young lovely lady named Belle. She is breaking their engagement because greed has corrupted their life. Belle felt that she was replaced by money in Scrooge's life. The ghost then took Scrooge to more recent Christmas, where he saw his former fiancée Belle with her husband, reminiscent about Scrooge. The husband says that Scrooge is now quite alone. On seeing all this, Scrooge couldn't take it anymore and begged the spirit to take him back. The first spirit takes him on a journey into his past. He sees himself as a child and he is happy. He remembers what it was like to have been a joyous young man with hopes and dreams. He learns what is missing in his life. In the purposeful anecdote of A Christmas Carol, the ghost of Christmas past speaks to memory. The matured appearance of the honest figure addresses the part of a memory as a young power that associates the distinctive phases of a man's life. His gleaming hat recommends the lighting up force of the psyche. The apparition starts Scrooge's transformation from hostile to Christmas Grinch to notice kid for the Christmas season. Every scene in the montage of scenes demonstrates a more youthful Scrooge who still has a capacity to love, a man who is still in contact with his kindred individuals. As the dreams go before him, Scrooge watched himself turn out to be always cool and insatiable until some definitive scenes. His everything expanding desire for cash destroys his affection for Belle and finishes his inversion to a close-fisted, venomous hermit. The wizard, through his recollection, strengthens Scrooge to review the mental scenes of his past. This dreamlike arrangement of hallucinatory home films conveys the generally solidified man to tears. This breakdown and the reconnection with the inclination self starts the way toward dissolving carelessly Scrooge's icy Beha outside. The second spirit was just the opposite to the first. The spirit is huge. It has a majestic giant clad in green robes, sits atop a throne made of gourmet feast. In a loud voice, the spirit announces himself as the host of Christmas present. The spirit tells Scrooge to touch his robe. Upon doing so, the feast and the room vanish instantly, and Scrooge finds himself alongside the spirit in the middle of the bustling city on Christmas morning. The Christmas vibe was everywhere in the face of the people. The city atmosphere was also chill and peaceful. Everyone was gay and merry. The morning was rather gloomy, foggy, and dingy, but there was peace and joyfulness in the city. It was snowy, so that many people were cleaning their doorways and pavements. Children were playing, busy among themselves, men and women with their best clothing. There was joy all over the city. The spirit then takes Scrooge to Boxcrat house. The family fancies themselves with everything they got and at best which they could afford. They were preparing a Christmas goose. Bob comes in carrying the crypt young boy Tiny Tim on his shoulders. Scrooge felt really bad and pity for the crippled boy. Scrooge begs to the spirit to know whether Tiny Tim will survive. The spirit told him that in the current condition he wouldn't be able to make the spirit Scrooge to a number of other Christmas gatherings, including the festives of an isolated community of manners. He also takes Scrooge to Fred's Christmas party. They were gossiping about him and made fun of him. There Scrooge loses himself in the numerous party games and has a wildly entertaining time, though no one was able to see him. He wanted to join with them badly. As the night proceeds, the ghost grows older. At last, Scrooge and the ghost come to a vast and desolate expanse. Here the ghost shows Scrooge a pair of starving children who travel with him beneath his robes. Their names are Ignorance and Want. The second spirit is Christmas present. He takes Scrooge to see how other people act and speak of him. He shows Scrooge the love that the characters have for one another despite having no money. He also sees their need for help for their son Tiny Tim. Scrooge learns to see the balance between money and family. Here Dickens portrays the two sides of Christmas. On one side, Christmas is beautiful, where everyone was with their best dress and luxury themselves, enjoy among themselves, throw big parties and exchanged drinks among themselves. While on the other side, Christmas is a time where poverty is at its worst, the poor striving and fighting for their survival. Christmas is no holiday for them. It's just a moment that made them realize how poor they are, how bad their condition is. It is time when their resentment is at worst. The Cratchits are Dickens' safeguard against this substantial scale, simply financial burdening on cruel method of thought, and update that England's poor are all people, living creatures with families and lives who couldn't and ought not to be cleared behind a math equation like some numerical disparity.